Hi, friends. Welcome back to Chaotic Crime. My voice probably sounds a little bit off. It's winter, and my sinuses never really react well in winter. So be prepared to hear a little bit of a nasally me. So for this week's case, we're going to be covering a pretty wild case, kind of like a little bit of a movie. Some of the cases that we hear are, absolutely bizarre to the point where you think I'm making it up. Now, also, just a quick disclaimer. I am a podcast for short attention span people. So if I miss info or some of the info isn't as well researched as others, please forgive me, because that is one part of the learning process. And two, it's hard to compact so much information into short episodes. So just bear that in mind. We're all learning and growing around here. So, yeah. And I'm also going to try to stop saying so, but I can't. So. Okay, so for today's episode, we're going to be covering the disappearance of Nicholas Barclay, a 13-year-old boy from Texas. This story really does center around a few pretty major topics. Some of those topics are desperation, identity, grief, manipulation, and the terrifying power of hope. So for the first part, we're going to break down who Nicholas is, because I touch on every single episode, and I'm going to say it in this episode again. This is about a real person, and that is the most important thing about every case that we talk about. Is this is a real person, and this is a real family, and it's a real story. So we need to remember that, and we need to start with who Nicholas was. Sorry, I just had to, if you're watching the visuals, I just had to change my jumper because I feel like my other jumper was like, the noise was going to really annoy me when I was editing. And I feel like you guys are going to be able to hear that even in the audio, in the audio. So back to what we're talking about. Who was Nicholas Barclay? So his full name was Nicholas Patrick Barclay, and he was born on December 31st, 1980. He lived in San Antonio, Texas with his mum, Beverly. And Beverly did have a different last name to Nicholas. It appears her last name is Dollarhide. So her full name is Beverly Dollarhide. And by all accounts, it actually appeared that Nicholas had a pretty difficult childhood. He seemed to be what some would describe as a troubled kid. He had a history of running away. He struggled in school. He had some minor run-ins with the police, and he reportedly had a volatile relationship with his family, especially his older brother, Jason. And Jason will come up again throughout this case, so remember that name. Jason is Nicholas's older brother. So Nicholas wasn't a perfect kid, and I mean, I can't really say that any of us were perfect kids. If you're sitting back and saying that you were a perfect kid, I think you might be bullshitting me. And he was a kid, nonetheless. He was a kid that deserved safety and deserved a chance. And one thing I think is so common and so important to shed light on is there is never generally a perfect victim. And Nicholas was no different. And at the time of his disappearance, he was only 13 years old. So he was a kid. So now we're going to jump straight into the day that Nicholas disappeared. I'm going to break down a full-on timeline of what I have researched and read to have happened that day. If I'm wrong in any points, please let me know, because I may have missed something. I feel like I've been researching a lot of cases lately, but I really do try to deep dive as much as I can. And I try to use the word alleged if the information is not proven in a court of law, or it's an opinion, or it's something that's come up. And most alleged things or conspiracy theories, I tend to research, but I mean, you guys are going to make will of what you do with that information, if that makes sense. So I'm going to leave it at that and keep going. So here's a timeline of the day it all began. So on June 13th, 1994, Nicholas had been playing basketball with his friends at the local park. Now, this park was located in San Antonio, Texas, which was Nicholas's hometown, as mentioned earlier. So on the 13th of June 1994, he called home asking his mum to come pick him up. But she was asleep after working a night shift at the local convenience store. So the person who answered the phone was Nicholas's older brother, Jason. Jason at the time was 20 and lived with Nicholas and their mum. Jason didn't want to pick Nicholas up, so he told Nicholas to walk home. So it is important to note that home was about 1.5 miles from what I've researched, which is about 2.4 Ks for all my Australian people out there. So from the local park to Nicholas's house, we're looking at like 2.4 Ks, which honestly for a 13-year-old maybe isn't like I remember walking about that far. So unfortunately, not given any other options, Nicholas began his walk home. However, between this call and Nicholas playing basketball with his friends at the park, he won't be seen again. So Nicholas was eventually reported missing, but this is where all the questions sort of start to begin. So to be quite honest, before the missing person report, it really seemed like nobody was worried about Nicholas. In fact, it didn't even really seem like anybody noticed he was gone. It's believed this was due to a few reasons. So Jason, Nicholas's older brother, and Nicholas's mum did struggle with substance abuse at the time of the disappearance. Along with this, so many stated that Nicholas had such a troubled background. A few things that were mentioned was having 3 tattoos at 13, constant fights with his mums and teachers, and then, of course, his history of running away, where in some cases he was known to disappear for days at a time. So initially, police treated this as any other runaway case. In fact, the police in the San Antonio area already knew of Nicholas as he had a record. His record consisted of breaking and entering, stealing, and truancy. If you guys don't know what truancy is, it's essentially wagging or skipping school. In some states, I'm guessing in the US, you could actually be charged with it. In Australia, you just kind of get in trouble and maybe like an internal suspension, or if you do it enough, I'm sure you could get in, a fair bit of trouble. So this was nothing major, but of course it's not great for someone his age. With the substance abuse issues going on with the older brother and mum, the police actually had quite a log of disturbance calls in relation to DV. It was noted that they were already at the house quite often at this point. So unfortunately, with all of these factors into play, it took Nicholas's family a whole 3 days to realise he was missing. Which I know is completely insane, but I'm just laying out the facts. If you're a mother, I'm sure you're listening to that and thinking, what the fuck? But the facts are the facts, and I'm here to lay them down. So by June 16th or June 17th, he was officially listed as a missing person. So we know that this time was different to any of the other times that Nicholas had run away on his own accord. He never contacted friends, he never used his bank account, and he never resurfaced. Nicholas's case did not get the media attention it deserved. They just seemed to not take his family seriously due to the past issues. One factor I didn't mention is because of his criminal history, he must have had a new charge, which was actually due to being caught a week after Nicholas disappeared. So the authorities actually believe that he was running away from his court hearing and the consequences that may lay with this charge. As it sort of seems, it was reported the outcome was either going to be juvenile detention or a group home facility of some kind. So about 3 months after Nicholas's disappearance, his brother Jason called the police claiming he had seen Nicholas trying to break into the garage of their home. But supposedly when Nicholas was seen and knew he had been seen, he immediately ran away before anyone could speak to him or grab him. So once the police arrived, they found no evidence that Nicholas was ever there. However, I'm not really sure how hard they looked. So I'm just going to save you guys a lot of heartache and pain and shit, because honestly, this is one of those cases where days become weeks, weeks become months, months become years, and nothing happened in this case. Like, it just went completely cold. And honestly, it doesn't really seem like there was ever really any proper looking. So the case was completely cold and it had been 3 years. So Nicholas was gone. There was no trace. There was no sightings apart from the one that I just mentioned from his brother Jason, and no answers. And it appears that his family really did cling to hope, especially his mother and his sister. But I really won't lie, behind the scenes, it seems like there were whispers. Some suspected foul play, some believed Nicholas had voluntarily run away and started a new life, and others believed that he was no longer alive. So this is where things get really interesting, and this is where this case is different to others. Because out of nowhere, in October 1997, the family got a phone call that would change everything. And this is truly where the story takes a bit of a twist, and I don't think anybody's really expecting it. I mean, I know I wasn't. So in October 1997, the authorities in Spain contacted the Barclay family with some pretty shocking news. A boy claiming to be Nicholas Barclay had been found. So Nicholas was actually found in Leonora, Spain, and he's now 16 years old. And they located him inside of a youth shelter. So Nicholas claimed he had been kidnapped by a sex trafficking ring. He actually stated he'd been kidnapped by high-ranking government officials, and he claimed he had been abused, kept in captivity, and had recently escaped. Okay, so if you're sitting there thinking, wait, how the hell did Nicholas end up in Spain? Same. This is the part of the story that is a blank area, the area that does not make any sense. But here's the thing. I want you to put yourself in the Barclays' position. Put yourself in their shoes. They were desperate for answers, for hope. So they were overjoyed at the chance that this was their little boy. So the Spain authorities then went on to send a photo. And incredibly and amazingly, the family said, yes, that's Nicholas. So Nicholas's older sister flew to Spain to pick up Nicholas and bring him back home to safety. However, when the sister arrived, she was shocked at the state of Nicholas. The brother she remembered was no longer the brother she had standing in front of her. Now, if you guys haven't seen a photo of Nicholas, please jump on our Instagram and have a look at some photos of him. It's also on our TikTok, or if you guys want to go and watch the visuals, I've got lots of photos and locations and different things that pop up around the video so that you guys can get a little bit more of a visual, accurate idea of some of these people that I'm talking about in some of these areas. So Nicholas has blue eyes and blonde hair. The new Nicholas had brown hair or dark hair. It's sort of, I would say more like a mousy, sort of medium, darkish sort of tone brown, and brown eyes. And he also had a receding hairline. So I know what you're thinking. I know. But just hang in there, because I am seriously as confused as you are. So I think we need to bear in mind that in some cases, sex traffickers or abductors will change your physical appearance, obviously to safeguard themselves for you looking similar to the disappeared person or the missing person. So this kind of isn't really uncommon, and just bear that in mind. Obviously, the eye color being different raises questions. But once we continue on with the story, you guys will hear why. Okay, so on top of all of that, Nicholas now spoke with a European accent. Now, this part, I mean, maybe over time it just happened, but this accent was thick, and that's important to note. But when asked, Nicholas did have a valid reason as to why everything had changed so drastically. He said the person or persons that had kidnapped him had completed and performed experiments on him that would change the colour of his eyes, his hair, and apparently many kids that were captured were so badly essayed that they were forced into learning new languages. So that explains why he now had a thick accent. And truly, Nicholas's sister did believe him, because while he didn't have all of Nicholas's previous traits, he did appear to be him in many other forms. So on top of that, she really did believe that Nicholas was heavily traumatized. So believing that he would come home the same person was truly wishful thinking. So with all of this, she brought Nicholas home. Nicholas went on to heal, recover, and live back at home with his family for 5 months. So to break it down, Nicholas had flown back to the USA with his sister, and the reunion was described as surreal. Nicholas's family met him at the airport, they cried, they hugged him, and they welcomed him home. But here's the thing. Nicholas did appear to be visually older than 16. He spoke with a noticeable French accent. His physical appearance didn't match, and his behaviour was off. But his family did accept him. And just to pause for a second, because you may be wondering why Nicholas's family didn't ask more questions. Because I believe when grief meets hope, sometimes logic often takes a backseat. So after 5 months, the media did begin to hound Nicholas because, as we all know, his story, the story of hope and survival, was one that everyone wants to jump on. Everyone wants to hear it. And one local reality show actually got permission to film the family inside the home for an upcoming episode. Now, I just want to note, thankfully, this show was the real deal. It wasn't like a lot of other reality shows. So as per normal, they hired a PI to investigate and research all of the case files, the story, talk to investigators, the whole 9 yards. And it did not take long for this PI to become suspicious. A private investigator named Charlie Parker was hired to look into the case. So Charlie compared a photo of Nicholas's ears to a current photo of Nicholas's ears and very quickly found that they did not match. This PI then notified authorities to what was going on. So let's just go over that one more time. Parker immediately saw red flags. The boy's ears, which is a bizarre thing to come and I guess figure this all out on, ears. So just note that, guys, we've all got very individual ears. So he noticed that the boy's ears didn't match Nicholas's ear shape, and the ear shape is a key identifier. He was very, very clearly older than Nicholas should have been. And his story of abduction didn't hold up under scrutiny. So Nicholas returned home in October of 1997. By 1998, the FBI had stepped in. And before we go any further, I'm just going to drop the bomb. So once the FBI stepped in with authorities' suspicions rising, they took Nicholas's fingerprints and DNA and found out that the person claiming to be Nicholas Barclay was not Nicholas Barclay. It was actually 23-year-old con artist Frederick Bourdin. And he was literally known to be a serial imposter. So by the time he had assumed Nicholas's identity, he had already impersonated over 100 children in more than a dozen countries, some of which were actually, again, real missing children, just like Nicholas. So this is seriously a man that preys on the vulnerability of others in their weakest and darkest fucking moments. Drains the hope like a termite. Okay, so let me actually just break down in dot point terms who this guy really was. Frederick had a history of impersonating missing children. He was a master manipulator, fluent in multiple languages and skilled at adopting accents and mannerisms. His motivation? A twisted mix of wanting to belong and enjoying the con. I believe, allegedly. So when confronted with the concrete evidence that he could not deny, Frederick finally confessed. He admitted he was a 23-year-old French national. He said he had impersonated Nicholas to escape his life in Europe. And this guy showed no fucking remorse, like not even a little bit. In fact, he actually seemed to really, really like the attention he was getting. So in this case, Frederick had actually seen the missing person poster of Nicholas and decided then and there to assume his identity. He dyed his hair blonde, he covered up his brown eyes with blue contact lenses and told the authorities he had been abducted and abused, which explained why his appearance, accent, and behaviour had changed. And somehow, incredibly, it fucking worked. So here's where things could get a little bit darker, but of course it kind of comes to a matter of how much you want to believe Frederick. Because Frederick later suggested that Nicholas's family might have accepted him so easily because they have something to hide. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to get into it too much either. I kind of believe this is true. To a degree. It just seems like there's a lot of suspicions into Nicholas just disappearing and then nobody reporting him missing for 3 days. So he claimed they may have been involved in Nicholas's original disappearance and saw him as a pretty convenient cover. Now, again, I'm just going to emphasize this is alleged. No charges were ever brought against the family regarding Nicholas's disappearance, but it is one of the more chilling aspects of this case. Did they believe Frederick because they wanted to believe, or did they believe him because they needed to? So eventually, Frederick was arrested and charged with passport fraud and perjury. He was sentenced to 6 years in a US federal prison. And after serving his time, he was deported back to France. And you'd honestly think that Frederick's story stops there. But no, Frederick went on to impersonate dozens of other missing children after his release in 2003. He went on to assume the identity of another missing 14-year-old boy, Leo Bally, who had been missing since 1996. DNA thankfully proved who he really was, and this was only after months of successfully impersonating again. He only served 4 months for this crime as well. And you'd think the story stops there, but it doesn't, again, because in 2005, Frederick went on to assume another young boy's identity. Now he was a 15-year-old boy, and he told everyone he was a Spanish orphan, stating his parents were killed in a car accident, and he somehow got let into a fucking high school, where he spent an entire month. A teacher ended up seeing a TV program about him and what he'd done. He was kicked out of the school immediately, and when asked why he'd done this, Frederick stated he is just looking and desperately seeking love and attention because he never received it as a child. He was generally and very disgustingly brilliant at his craft. He fooled so many people by dressing younger, and he trained himself to walk differently. He stated in reports that he used a shit ton of anti-aging creams to maintain his youthful look. He hid his receding hairline by wearing hats and sometimes beanies. And his con game continued for years, and I seriously don't know how. He really doesn't look overly young to me in the images that I've seen, but somehow the scam continues. So it's actually crazy. When I done a deep dive to see what Frederick was actually doing these days, turns out he got married and went on to have 5 children of his own. It does seem like him and his wife have separated, but he's actually gone on to live a seemingly normal life. But I just want to be honest, like the manipulation and psychological control that that man had, do you ever really not have that? Like it seems terrifying. So may I never run into Frederick. Okay, so now that we've gotten into all of that, I want to bring the story back to what this is really about. Nicholas. Where is the real Nicholas Barclay? So as of 2025, Nicholas still remains missing. No trace of him has ever been found, and his family maintains they had no involvement in his disappearance, although suspicions do linger. So that's the true tragedy here. Frederick's con not only deepened the family's trauma, it also stole critical time from the real investigation. Okay, so for this next part, I think it's important that we deep dive into some theories. Now, it's important that these are not my theories. These are theories that have hit the internet and gone fucking crazy. So that is what we're going to discuss. I, of course, have my opinions. You'll probably hear them throughout, but just know that this is not just coming from me. It's coming from a lot of people. So there is a lot of possibilities in this case. And if I'm being completely honest, not many of these really feel very comforting. But we're going to go through them anyway. So theory 1 is that Nicholas ran away and he started a new life. Now, this is the official early theory that Nicholas, who had a history of running away, simply disappeared by choice. So maybe he wanted to escape his troubled home life. Maybe he found a way to survive off the grid. But here's the problem with this theory for me, is Nicholas was only 13 years old. He had no money, no belongings, no ID, and there has been 0 official confirmed sightings of him since. So I don't really buy this one completely, if I'm being honest, in my opinion. I think it could have been a factor, but it doesn't explain the total radio silence for decades. I don't know many 13-year-olds that can successfully run away from home at that age. You know, I think we've all packed our suitcase at a young age and gone, I'm running away from home. Maybe some of us have even done it successfully for, you know, a short amount of time, but going with no sightings, nothing, like he's just completely fallen off the grid. That seems quite impressive for a 13-year-old. So if he did do it, kudos. And if he did do it, I think it's very, if this theory stood any ground, I think someone else had to be involved in helping Nicholas run away. That's, you know, that's my theory. That's my theory in that theory. If that theory makes any sense, that's what I think, is he couldn't have done it alone. All right, so moving on to theory 2. And this is that Nicholas was killed, possibly by someone close to him and potentially by family. So this is probably the darkest and most disturbing theory. Some people believe that Nicholas never left that park on June 13th, 1994. There are rumours of abuse and volatile relationships in that home, especially with his older brother Jason. So what's actually devastating is if this theory was true, we'll never know, because Jason died of a drug overdose in 1998 after Frederick was exposed, which some people did find suspicious, and people have actually suspected that the drug overdose was intentional rather than accidental. Okay, so here's where it all gets a little murky, and the community and the public had some serious questions about the family. And these were some of the questions that just kept coming into play. Is why did the family so quickly accept somebody who clearly wasn't Nicholas? And then, of course, Frederick himself, which, you know, doesn't really, you know, his words don't really have much depth. But he did claim himself that they accepted him because they had something to hide, that they knew that the real Nicholas was gone, and this allowed them to cover it up. Now, of course, this is alleged. No charges were ever brought against anyone in the family, but you can't deny that some of this does look suspicious. I can't deny that either, but of course there's so many things that look suspicious that may have a very logical answer, a very harmless answer. I just don't know if we're ever going to really know. Okay, so theory 3 is that Nicholas was abducted by strangers. So people have speculated that maybe right after leaving the park, he was abducted by someone completely unknown to him. Frederick's story of sex trafficking was fake, of course, but could there have been some truth in the idea that somebody actually took him? And this theory explains why he was never seen again, but no credible leads have ever resurfaced in relation to this. And honestly, it could actually be the case that Nicholas just was met with some foul play, like he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it was a total stranger. But of course, no evidence, no leads, nothing. So we can't even dive into this theory anymore, because there's not, like, as far as I know, there's nothing else. If there's something else that you guys know, please tell me. So theory 4, which is maybe a little bit blown out there, but of course people are going to have their theories. This is the theory that Frederick's involvement was deeper than it appeared. Okay, so like I said, this one is a bit fringe, but some do speculate that Frederick might have known more about what happened to Nicholas than he actually admitted. Maybe he had insider knowledge that helped him impersonate Nicholas so convincingly. Maybe he used, unknowingly or knowingly, a distraction or a cover-up. Now, I really do think this one is a bit of a stretch, but this case is like particularly strange. So no one can really completely rule anything out. But I do think it's a stretch. Given that Frederick was living in a dozen different states and seemed to be impersonating many different people, I think he had his priorities set in other areas by the looks of it. But my job here is to discuss all the theories, even if they're a little bit far-fetched. So that's where we're at. So the last thing I want to mention, and one thing that has come out a lot, is obviously heaps of people raise questions as to why the family accepted Frederick. And the theory behind that, of course, ruling out everything else that we've spoken about, is the family was just in denial. pure grief and hope. And honestly, this is probably the simplest theory, is that they accepted Frederick because they were so desperate. They wanted so badly for Nicholas to come home that they ignored any obvious red flags. So there's no conspiracy in this one, just human grief and an overwhelming need to believe. And I can see this one too, because hope will make you see what you want to see. And I think we've all been in a position or a place in our life where we've felt that, we've done that, we've been there. And I think we can all agree that not knowing would be suffocating. So what are our final thoughts on this case? Because it's chaotic, yes, but it's also heartbreaking. A young boy disappears and his family suffers for years, and a master manipulator exploits their grief, and in the end, Nicholas Barclay is still missing. Frederick actually said once that he gave the family hope, but to me, he gave them false hope and possibly closed the door on finding the truth about Nicholas forever. Okay, so here is where we are, and here is all the unanswered questions that we have. What really happened to Nicholas Barclay in 1994? Why did the family so readily accept someone who clearly wasn't him? And was there something darker going on behind the scenes? Will the truth about Nicholas's fate ever come out? So these are some of the questions that haunt this case and truly fucking haunt me. And until they're answered, justice remains elusive. Okay, so remember back at the start how I said that this sort of feels like a movie? Well, they made a movie or a documentary. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys some recommendations, and I've also attached them below for you. The Imposter came out in 2012, and this is a full-length feature documentary about this exact case. And it was directed by Bart Layton. And it uses interviews from the Barclay family, from Frederick himself, from law enforcement, and from private investigators. It combines reenactments with real footage. It's gripping and it's truly fucking eerie. So go and check that one out. It's available on Netflix, Amazon, and Apple TV in some regions. Another one is Real Story's YouTube channel, and it is called The Imposter, the true story of Frederick Bourdin. So it's a shorter documentary. I think it's about 45 minutes, and it focuses pretty heavily on Frederick's background and his wider history of impersonating children. Like I said, and I kind of broke down briefly, he's done this many times, more times than I probably know, have researched, discussed, but definitely go and look at it and it'll break down all of his history. And if you guys want another episode on just him, let me know. So another one that actually isn't kind of directly about this case, but explores missing children and family denial dynamics, is Unsolved Mysteries reboot, Netflix reboot they brought out in 2020. So season 1, episode 5, I think it's called Missing Witnesses. Definitely go and check that one out. So the Unsolved Mystery episode can kind of be used as a reference as to why families may accept imposters or false narratives. So that's all for today's episode of Chaotic Crime. This case makes me fucking mad, because Nicholas did deserve better, and so did the search for him. So if you've got thoughts, theories, or more information on this case, my inbox is always open. If you have any leads in relation to this case, I have left the information below. So until next time, stay loud, stay curious, and never stop asking questions.